All right, let's dive in. Today, we're journeying to a city cloaked in myth and history, Troy. We're joined by expert name to unpack excerpts from the Wikipedia article on Troy, and wow, there's a lot to uncover. We're talking about a place with over 4,000 years of history, layer upon layer of civilization. It's mind-boggling.
It really is. Like a giant archaeological layer cake, and we're here for all the flavors.
And I hear the frosting is made of mystery. So, where do we even begin with a place as layered as Troy? What surprised archaeologists the most when they first started digging?
It's fascinating. What surprised them, and continues to surprise us, is how much more complex the real Troy is compared to the epic poems. We're talking 9 distinct cities uncovered at Troy. 9, each built on the ruins of the last.
9 cities. That's not just one lost city, that's like a whole subscription box of lost cities.
Right, it's a tapestry of civilizations, each with its own story. We're not just talking about the Trojan War here, but a journey through time.
So, where do we begin on this journey?
Chronologically, we start with Troy first, going way back to 3000 to 2550 BC. Even in this earliest phase, we see evidence of some pretty sophisticated defenses, fortifications that suggest Troy was strategically important even then.
Fortifications? Like, what was high-tech security in 3000 BC?
Picture massive limestone walls. And get this, these walls were renovated, strengthened over time. That tells us the people of Troy first, they were dealing with something, some kind of persistent threat. This wasn't a one-time thing. They were actively defending their city for generations.
Wow, talk about resilience. They were facing whatever came their way, adapting, rebuilding. So what's next in our layer cake of Trojan history?
Fast forward a few hundred years, and we arrive at Troy II, roughly 2550 to 2300 BC. And this is where things get a little messy.
Oh, I think I know where this is going. This is the layer that Heinrich Schliemann, that early archaeologist, mistook for Homeric Troy, right?
One and the same. He was convinced he'd found the real deal Priam's treasure, maybe even pieces of the Trojan horse.
And he wasn't exactly wrong about finding treasure, was he?
Not at all. He unearthed incredible artifacts, luxury goods from across the ancient world, stuff from the Baltic region, India, even as far as Afghanistan, all passing through Troy II. It was clearly a major hub and a vast trade network.
But there's always a but.
But dating techniques back then weren't what they are now. We know now that Troy II predates the Trojan War by several centuries.
Okay, so not the Trojan War Troy, but still a hugely important discovery. I mean, those trade connections showed just how cosmopolitan Troy was, even back then. Which still leaves the question, which layer the Trojan War Troy? Or is that even the right question?
$1 million question, and to answer it, we need to jump ahead to the layer that really gets historians buzzing Troy VI.
Okay, Troy VI, lay it on me.
This period, around 1750 to 1300 BC, reveals a sprawling city, 16 times larger than previously thought. Not just a fort, a bustling urban center. And here's the kicker, the architecture. It actually lines up with some of Homer's descriptions in the Iliad. Paved streets, grand gates, even the layout of certain buildings.
Whoa, hold on. So there are tangible links to the stories. Does that mean the Trojan War, as Homer tells it, actually happened?
Well, it's not a perfect match. Plus, there's another player in our story, the Hittites.
The Hittites.
Yeah, these were a powerful empire in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. And they referred to Troy as Walusa. They kept records, and in these records we find mentions of kings, alliances, conflicts.
So there's written evidence from another civilization. Wait, are you telling me we might have actual mentions of Troy from the time period of the Trojan War itself?
It's possible. They mention a king named Alexandru, who some believe is the inspiration for Paris the prince, who kidnaps Helen in the Iliad. They even talk about interactions with a group called the Ahiawa, who many scholars think were the Mycenaean Greeks.
So we have another civilization, maybe even the Mycenaeans themselves, mentioning Troy. Does this confirm the Trojan War happened? Give me a yes or no here.
It's not that simple, I'm afraid. These Hittite texts, they definitely hint at alliances, conflicts, power struggles, all potentially involving Troy and the Mycenaean Greeks. But a smoking gun? No, there's no explicit mention of one big war that mirrors Homer's Iliad.
Okay, so no definitive proof, more like historical whispers that something was going down in this region. But wait, we can't forget about Troy Vibe. That's the layer with those mysterious Phrygians, right? Tell me more about them.
Yes, Troy Vibe. This layer is particularly interesting because it suggests a new chapter in Troy's story. Around 1180 BC, we see evidence of these Phrygian migrants bringing their own culture and traditions to Troy.
Phrygian migrants. So are we talking about a peaceful blending of cultures here, or was this more of a hostile takeover situation?
It's hard to say for sure, but what we do know is that this wasn't just a small group passing through. These Phrygians left their mark on Troy, which suggests a more lasting presence. It paints a picture of a city in transition, adapting to yet another wave of cultural influence. And what's fascinating is that this change coincides with a period of widespread upheaval in the ancient world.
Upheaval? What kind of upheaval?
Well, around the same time that the Phrygians show up, many of the great Bronze Age civilizations in the Mediterranean, including the Mycenaeans in Greece, they start to collapse. Cities are destroyed, trade routes are disrupted. It's a period of chaos and transformation. And in the midst of all this, here comes Troy, still standing, but forever changed.
It's like Troy is this constant in a world of change. But before we get too caught up in the Phrygians and the fall of the Bronze Age, what happened to Troy the Athia? What was the transition like between those two periods?
That's a crucial point. Troy the Oivo, the layer immediately preceding the Phrygian arrival, was destroyed around 1180 BC. We see evidence of this destruction in the archaeological records, scorch marks, collapsed structures, and it certainly suggests a possible attack.
Okay, so there's clear evidence of destruction. Was it the Mycenaean Greeks finally launching their epic assault on Troy? Is this the real Trojan War revealing itself?
It's certainly a possibility. However, the timing doesn't quite line up with what we understand from the traditional dating of the Trojan War. Plus, it's important to remember that cities in the ancient world were frequently attacked and destroyed. Attributing Troy the Aethia's demise solely to the Mycenaean Greeks might be premature.
So it's like trying to piece together a puzzle where some of the pieces are missing and others might belong to a completely different box. So we have all this intrigue, destruction, new arrivals. What happens next in this saga? Does Troy ever get a break?
Well, Troy's story doesn't end with the Bronze Age. In fact, it takes a fascinating turn as we move into the classical, Hellenistic, and even the Roman periods.
That's a story for our next act. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's rewind just a bit. We've talked about several layers of Troy, each with unique characteristics. I'm curious, for you, what's one detail or discovery from these earlier layers that really stood out, something that gave you that aha moment?
You know, it's the small details that often reveal the most about the past. And for me, it's the discovery of a particular type of pottery in Troy Vibe, barbarian ware, as it's often called. You know, it's the small details that often reveal the most about the past. And for me, it's the discovery of a particular type of pottery in Troy Vibe, barbarian ware, as it's often called. It's a great example of how archaeology can challenge our assumptions.
Barbarian ware. Okay, that sounds a little ominous, like something you'd find in Conan the Barbarian's pantry. What's the story with this pottery?
Well, this pottery, with its geometric designs, burnished surfaces, it was initially seen as evidence of a cultural decline. Like the refined traditions of earlier periods have been replaced by something more primitive.
Ah, so they saw a change in pottery style and basically jumped to a conclusion about the decline of civilization. It really makes you think about the biases we bring to these interpretations, even now.
Exactly. But further analysis showed something really interesting. This barbarian ware, it actually originated in southeastern Europe, likely brought to Troy by those Phrygian migrants.
So not a sign of decline after all, more like evidence of new ideas, new influences.
Right. This pottery, it wasn't a step back, but a reflection of these new arrivals, new ways of life coming to Troy. A good reminder that what one culture might consider barbarian can be another culture's treasured tradition.
It's a good reminder not to judge a book by its cover, or, I guess, a piece of pottery. But this brings us to an interesting point in our timeline. It's not just about the Trojan War anymore, is it? We're seeing a bigger picture here. Cultural exchange, migration, adaptation, all happening over centuries. So what happens to Troy after these Phrygians arrive? Do they manage to find some lasting peace?
Well, not exactly, but what's fascinating is how Troy's identity kind of shifts during this time. It transitions from a city defined by its potential conflict with the Greeks to one that's celebrated for its legendary past.
Okay, now that is a plot twist. How does a city go from potential battleground to, like, must-see tourist destination?
Well, location played a part. Troy's position on the Dardanelles Strait, always strategically important. But what really put Troy back on the map was the power of myth and legend. And for that, we can thank figures like Alexander the Great.
Ah, Alexander the Great, history's ultimate fanboy. Wasn't he completely obsessed with the heroes of the Trojan War?
Oh, absolutely. During his campaigns in the 4th century BC, he made a point of visiting Troy, offered sacrifices at the supposed tombs of Achilles and Patroclus. Basically declared himself a huge fan of these legendary warriors. It was a big PR move.
So he was using his celebrity, if you will, to boost Troy's profile, the ultimate influencer. Did it work? Did Alexander's little visit actually do anything for Troy?
I'd say so. It cemented Troy's legendary status. Before, Troy was known for its role in the Trojan War. After Alexander, it became a pilgrimage site, a place where history and myth were intertwined. He basically solidified Troy's place in the cultural imagination, setting the stage for centuries of, well, fascination.
Wow, talk about a legacy makeover. One visit from the most famous guy in the world, and boom, Troy is back on the map. But what about the Romans? They weren't exactly known for shying away from a good conquest. What happens when they show up on the scene? Do they just bulldoze everything and put up a Rome Troy edition sign on it?
Not quite. While the Romans definitely expanded and developed the city, they also showed a remarkable reverence for Troy's past. They built temples to Roman gods, of course, but they also built a huge theater, perfect for staging those epic Trojan War plays. There's even evidence they held athletic games in honor of the heroes from the Iliad.
So instead of erasing Troy's past, the Romans embraced it. They recognized that this city had a story, and they incorporated it into their own narrative.
Exactly. They understood the power of a good story. And in a way, they were ensuring that Troy's legacy lived on, even as they made their own mark.
It's like they were saying, we're Romans, we conquer, but we also appreciate a good story. But let's get back to the Trojan War itself. After everything we've uncovered, the layers of history, the whispers of conflict, what's the verdict? Did it happen? Did it not? Was it one big war or a series of smaller events, all kind of mashed together over time?
The million-dollar question. And honestly, even with all the evidence we have, archaeology can't give us a definitive answer.
No smoking chariots buried in the ruins, huh?
Not quite. But what we do have are these compelling pieces. We have the destruction layers at Troy VI, the AAA, suggesting attacks.
Yeah.
We have the Hittite texts hinting at conflicts. And, of course, we have Homer's Iliad, a story that has captivated people for thousands of years.
It seems like we've hit a wall, literally and metaphorically. So how do you even begin to reconcile all these pieces? How do you bridge the gap between archaeology and legend?
That's where things get really interesting. And that's what we'll dive into right after this.
All right, so we're back. We've got these tantalizing clues, these whispers of conflict, destruction layers, ancient texts, and of course Homer's epic poem. But how do we even begin to reconcile all of that with the reality of what actually went down at Troy?
That's the challenge, isn't it? Trying to piece together a puzzle with pieces from different puzzles. It's like some scholars even suggest that the Trojan War, as we know it, the one Homer describes in the Iliad, it might not have been one single historical event.
Wait, so you're saying there wasn't a Trojan War?
I wouldn't go that far. But it's possible that what we think of as the Trojan War might actually be an amalgamation of multiple conflicts, events that happened over centuries, all blending together over time.
Okay, so like a giant game of historical telephone where the story gets more and more embellished with each retelling.
Exactly. Imagine those early storytellers weaving together tales of local battles, adding a little drama here, some divine intervention there. Over generations, those stories could easily transform into something resembling the epic clash we find in the Iliad.
That makes sense. We humans do love a good story. But even if the Trojan War wasn't this one massive conflict, there's still that lingering question, why this story? Out of all the stories from the ancient world, why has the story of Troy resonated for thousands of years? What makes it so special?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Perhaps it's the universal themes at play: love, loss, betrayal, the desire for power, the consequences of war. These are things that still resonate with people today.
And we can't forget about the Trojan horse. I mean, even if we accept that the war itself might be more legend than fact, the image of that giant wooden horse, that symbol of deception and cunning, it's just so iconic. Speaking of which, you were about to tell us about some of those alternative theories about the Trojan horse.
Oh, yes. While some people believe it was literally a giant wooden horse, a siege engine used in warfare, others suggest it might be a metaphor.
A metaphor? For what?
Remember those devastating earthquakes we talked about earlier, the ones that rocked Troy VI? Some scholars theorize that the Trojan horse could symbolize a natural disaster, an earthquake, a fire, a flood. Some event that weakened the city allowed an enemy to take advantage of the situation.
So instead of a wooden horse wheeled through the gates, it was an earthquake or a fire that brought down the walls of Troy. That's a really interesting interpretation. It takes something fantastical and gives it roots in a reality that people at the time would have understood all too well.
Right. It reminds us that even the most fantastical myths often have their origins in real-world experiences.
This whole deep dive has been a great reminder that history isn't just dates and battles. It's about trying to understand the lives, the beliefs, the stories of people who lived centuries before us, even when those stories are messy and full of contradictions.
Exactly. And when it comes to Troy, perhaps the most important takeaway is that the search for truth is ongoing. There will always be new discoveries, new ways of interpreting the evidence. It's a journey without a real end.
And that sense of mystery, that possibility for new discoveries, it's part of what keeps these stories alive, right? It keeps us coming back for more.
Absolutely. Troy continues to fascinate us, challenge us, inspire us, and I have a feeling it will continue to do so for centuries to come.
Well said. A huge thank you to our expert for taking us on this incredible journey to Troy, and to all of you for listening. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep uncovering the mysteries of the past.